this place brings up special memories for me. I was on holiday in Västerås, quite close to here, when I found out I was going to be made editor of The Spectator. I was given 3 weeks' notice and told not to tell anybody, not to make any phone calls. So I had 3 weeks wandering around this kind of countryside, trying to wonder what on earth an editor does, what I would do. And I was given a sort of strange remit, a brilliant remit by our proprietors. They told me two things. One, that my job was to make them proud to own The Spectator. That was it. I could define that however I wanted. And secondly was to remember that The Spectator's got the oldest magazine in the world, and it's got a 2-century tradition of basically championing liberty. Their point was this was going to become a lot more difficult in the digital age, and that the forces trying to stop people promoting liberty would be greater than ever. Now, at the time, I was just, a writer. Writers tend not to have to worry about any of these things, and I couldn't work out what they meant. I thought, well, surely the social media era allowed 1,000 flowers to bloom. It would give voices to a whole bunch of people. It would be a force for diversity rather than conformity. But my proprietors saw it the other way. They were thinking that any new digital innovation which helps publishers will also help the forces of censorship, allow them to take new forms. And if you don't know what those new forms are, you're more likely to succumb to them. So that was, broadly speaking, how it all worked out. And I think they have been vindicated over the years. And I look back thinking it was that I was quite naive not to quite realize what was about to hit me. And that the job of editing, sure, I mean, a good chunk of it is working out what goes in the magazine. But the rest of it is fighting battles, especially if you're in the business of doing minority opinions, which The Spectator is. Now, for those of you who don't know much about The Spectator, we've always basically been an unusual position of being completely isolated but completely correct. Well, that's how I see it. Anyway, right? So I could give you so many examples. I mean, we were set up to campaign for the Great Reform Act in 1828. Well, the Reform Act came 4 years later. When the American Civil War came out, we were the only publication in Britain to campaign supporting the North against the slave-owning South. We almost went bust doing that, but we tended not to really follow the money, as it were. We tended to follow the foundating principles. In the 1950s, we started a campaign for the decriminalization of homosexuality. We were called the Bugger's Bugle for a while. That was our... That's actually a great strapline. We should have used it in advertising campaigns. But anyway, and then we were the only publication to back Thatcher in the first ballot, the only publication to back Brexit in the first referendum. Well, other than the Morning Star, for slightly different reasons. So we the only publication to stop campaign against Britain joining the ERM. My job is to champion minority voices, and that is a lot more difficult now in the era where there are lots of other ways of stopping that from taking place. And the way things are right now, I'd like to argue that rather than living in a new era of liberty, we're living in an era where the forces of censorship have been stronger than at any time in our modern history, because these forces are now hidden. There are censorship decisions taken in private, with a very complicated nervous system, which works in a way that people who aren't in my job would struggle to understand, because you simply cannot see the dots being joined. Also dangerous because newspapers, by and large, are going along with this rather than fighting it, for reasons that I'll come to. Now, you might think, of course, that everybody knows what a Twitter storm is. And you might think to yourself, who cares about a Twitter storm? It doesn't really matter what a bunch of teenagers are saying about me on social media. That certainly is my inclination. I'm of a generation where I would struggle to think any of this matters. But it is a huge mistake, I think, to dismiss this, because some of the mightiest forces in journalism have been felled by this Twitter storm, have been humbled by them. In my job as an editor, I've looked at the battles my fellow editors have faced and the battles that they have lost. For example, take Ian Buruma. He was editor of the New York Review of Books for a while. Many of you will know him. He's a fantastic writer, a fantastic journalist. He didn't even last a year in that job because he published an article by somebody who'd been acquitted on some sex offence charge. He was found not guilty. Ian Buruma thought he would give space to somebody to argue what it was like going through that process. The Twitter mob came after him, and Ian Buruma had to resign. It was incredible. His mistake, by the way, was not to expect the ferocity of the backlash, to dismiss that backlash as being trivial, because that backlash found a way of getting through to his other writers, to his advertisers. They join the Twitter storm, and that becomes a force to which somebody of his stature has to succumb. Then take David Remnick, editor of The New Yorker, probably one of the most successful editors around right now. He thought he'd interview Steve Bannon on a forum like this. You wouldn't think that's particularly controversial. That's what journalists do. They interview people with whom they disagree. But then there was a Twitter storm about that. His staff members then joined the Twitter storm saying, what's my boss doing? Us editors are not used to that kind of questioning. But, you know, it happened. And then they got to the New Yorker's advertisers, and then they had to pull the interview. To me, that was a really significant and dark moment when even editors do not dare to interview somebody who'd been a chief of staff in the White House through fear of censure. And then something else which almost certainly none of you will have taken in, but Kelvin Mackenzie, editor of The Sun in the 1980s, one of the biggest, most ferocious newspaper editors, he used to say that it doesn't matter what your non-readers care about you. He was fired by The Sun for a column where he used the word monkey to describe what he thought was a white footballer. Turns out the footballer was a quarter or an eighth black or mixed race or something. His remark obviously wasn't racist, it was successfully cast as racist, and he was fired. All the battles that guy walked through in the 80s, he survived them, but he couldn't survive the new digital era. So the Twitter storms serve to... So that's why I take them seriously. And I have quite a hard job persuading my colleagues to take them seriously, because they're all of a disposition that we didn't come into journalism to worry about being ratioed on Twitter. As Barry Weiss successfully said, when you're writing with even half a mind to how Twitter's going to react to it, you cease to become a writer. You start to self-censor, you do something else. But then again, if you walk into these fights and you're not prepared to win them, or you can't win them, then you will lose something pretty big. So the Twitter storms, they do have a real effect. They can certainly deter writers. I've seen one of my writers, Clarissa Tan, she was this brilliant writer from Malaysia, who wrote a piece about how Britain has got minimal racism compared to what she encountered in Asia. Now, for that, she had the mob come after her, and she was absolutely devastated. And I saw this young, beautiful, incredible writer deterred at article number 1. That was the last controversial thing she wrote because she didn't want to be seen to be a racist. Who would? My point is this force is powerful and more powerful than people want to admit. I wouldn't, if Clarissa hadn't passed away, I wouldn't be giving you this story now because people don't want to really admit to the effect it has on them, but it does have an effect. The other mechanism of the nervous system here is that there is such a thing as a troll farm now. There's an outfit called Stop Funding Hate for a troll farm. They'll find an article they don't like, and then they will name the companies advertising in that publication, and then they will send their little Twitter troll army to go after these companies in social media. So they'll be saying, hey, at Acne Inc., did you realize you're advertising in the Daily Mail, which has got some transphobic article? Now, this is all nonsense, but it's aimed at the corporates, and the corporates do not have a fist for a fight, they don't have battles, and the person handling the corporate social media account is used to apologizing to people who complain. So that way, you can get some corporate to say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize we were advertising in that, we won't do it again. And then you get advertisers pulling out and basically exerting editorial pressure on publications. Now, this can have an effect. I think Virgin Rail, for example, pulled out of advertising in the Daily Mail for a while as a result of a successful campaign by a troll farm. And there's the rise of woke capitalism, I think, marries very much with the hate mobs, because when you get corporates who feel that they need to be giving their view on everything in the world, and they are successfully persuaded that there is a minority opinion which can be described as hate speech or anything like that, then they'll be encouraged to distance themselves from that opinion. And in the way where social media accounts turn these corporations into commentators, you have a new form of effective pressure. I say it's effective because still publications get a good chunk of their money, about 40%, 50% from advertisers. This is a factor. Now, The Spectator, we get 6% of our money from advertisers. We could lose every single advertiser and still turn a healthy profit. We're quite lucky in that way. But we were targeted by Stop Funding Hate. They complained against an article that Matthew Parris written about, I think it was described as transphobic. And the Co-op announced that they wouldn't be advertising with The Spectator anymore. Now, had I been owned by venture capitalists, they might have taken that seriously. They might have seen this as a threat to their business model. I, as an editor, might have been asked not to run these controversial articles. These kind of pressures are very, very real. Had I been owned by some other kind of person who is vulnerable to those kind of accusations on social media, I could have been told to stay away, stop causing trouble, don't do the things that are going to get. Now, luckily, I answer to this guy called Andrew Neil, who, as some of you might know, is one of the most ferocious fighters in the world. He was sitting in the south of France, finding out that where he lives, finding out that the Co-op had banned us. He was delighted. Before I could even pick up the phone to him, he denounced that the Co-op were banned from advertising with The Spectator. And anybody who liked their tweet was also going to be banned from advertising. So I was on the phone trying to calm him down, saying, Andrew, come on, you've just banned like 12 advertisers. He didn't care. He's like, no, we're not going to be intimidated. So, by the way, I'm not aware of any other publication that's banned an advertiser for this. It's pretty rare. But this is a complete freak of nature that I have running the commercial side of this, Andrew Neil. Now, the Co-op backed down, they did an apology, and we had a champagne taste. We tasted their in-house. Anyway, it worked out well in the end. But suffice to say, that kind of nervous system can work differently for other publications. We're owned by a family, the Barclay brothers, who've got no interest at all in courting a public reputation. They're quite private people. But had we been owned by somebody who's slightly more in the work corporation, then you can bet that the word would go out to not cause such trouble. Now, all of this now, if you can navigate them, if you're prepared for the fight, then it can be quite fun. The Spectator is quite a competitive place. Kimmy Badenoch is speaking after me. She used to be our head of digital, and she would always come down saying, don't you dare give in to these guys. You know, I'm going to resign if you... Anyway, I mean, you know, so, but that is unusual. For bigger publications whose sales are going down the whole time, it's far more sensitive. Now, the biggest threat now comes in social media, because what's happening there is the social media companies are not promoting things which they are persuaded are problematic. I would love to say, you might think, who cares? I don't get my news from Facebook, I subscribe. Well, you might do. But Facebook is now the #1 provider of written news in Britain. It's ahead of everybody apart from the broadcasters. You might think that you get your Facebook news feeds from people you follow. Well, you don't. That's curated for you by an algorithm. The person who sets that algorithm has got incredible power. So Zuckerberg and all of these guys, they've got way more power now than Murdoch, than Hearst, than Beaverbrook, than any press baron ever dreamed of. Because the person who sets the algorithm to decide what gets promoted and what doesn't can set the parameters of debate to an incredible degree. Now, while the other media barons cared very much about press freedom, Zuckerberg, etc., do not care one little bit. They just want to make money out of selling adverts on videos of cats playing the piano and stuff. They do not want the hassle which comes from publishing controversial opinion. So during the pandemic, for example, The Spectator, we commissioned 3 academics to write a piece about the evidence for face masks. Now, that evidence weighed against the prevailing opinion, and this is what then happened when we published this on Facebook. Facebook labels it false information. I, as an editor, am warned that if I continue to publish this, I'm going to be penalized by Facebook. My articles are not going to be promoted anymore. This gives me a very big incentive to stay away from controversial subjects, not to promote something that goes against the grain, even if that is by 2 Oxford academics. This kind of thing has got way more, because we get so much of our traffic and therefore revenue from social media, this matters a lot. Now, what's happening now is that the Britain has got the online safety bill coming through, which is the first of its kind, an incredible threat to liberty, and one which will be on the way to Europe pretty soon. That gives social media companies the power, indeed the obligation, to censor what they regard as a new category, legal but harmful. What does harmful mean? It's up to them to describe. That's what Facebook thinks is harmful. And this is, by the way, one of the things I know about. Most of the time these decisions are taken, you're not told. They're shadow banned. They're not promoted. YouTube took down a video from David Davis, a politician, arguing against vaccine passports. Facebook took down the page of a Socialist Workers' Party. Minority opinion now can be taken down not by humans, but by algorithms. Now, this is happening in so many ways. I see it, being in the position that I'm in right now, but it's not really getting political attention. If anything, the politicians are making it worse. So I would submit that we are now living, perhaps have been through, a golden era of press freedom. We're now entering an era of digital censorship whose forces are invisible, pernicious, and need to be recognized and fought back. But those of us who do care about liberty and about press freedom have got a hell of a fight on our hands. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
How do you take Twitter storms seriously, as you phrased it?
Why do I take them seriously?
How do you take it?
Oh, how? First of all, you need to recognise what's going to cause a Twitter storm. You can't be naive about it. And you need to ask yourself as a publisher, what's going to create a problem? And is this worth the fight? And can we win the fight? If you haven't worked out in advance what's going to cause the problem, you're not doing your job as an editor. Now, this means a new job of scrutiny. Normally, we give stuff to the lawyers will screen it for legal problems. But right now, I built in The Spectator a team of people who can work out what we call risk. Now, we'd never tell an author to self-censor. We do this at the editing stage. But we collectively need to be grown up about what we're going to have to fight for. We fight in every single issue, but we're now pretty good at predicting what's going to cause a fight. Usually it's a cartoon or a joke, but we need to work out just how we're going to win it. You need to be grown up about it and not naive. And it goes against so many journalistic instincts. You do not want to think what those lunatics are going to say about you. But if you're going to protect the broad parameters of debate, then you need a mechanism in place, and you need to put more resources behind that than you do legal checks.
So you do succumb to self-censorship sometimes, making a kind of cost-benefit analysis, saying that it's not worth the trouble publishing this article.
I would say in the many decisions I've had, and I have about 5 or 6 per week, we have never censored anything. Sometimes you might slightly rephrase a word, for example. And by the way, that isn't always a bad thing. Some phrases can be more open to misinterpretation than others. Now, if you take, for example, Kevin Myers, a great journalist, sacked by the Sunday Times, a Murdoch outfit, he wrote a piece where he was talking about women getting paid in the media. He very, rather stupidly, wrote a piece about how Vanessa Feltz, who was a Jew, got paid very well, and made some comment about that's because Jews are not known to sell their services at a discount. Now, you could see that was a little aside, an editor might have taken that as an aside. But had that gone through a team looking at it for social media, you could have thought, my God, you're going to be cast as an anti-Semite here, Kevin. So why don't you go around here and think, is that joke, is that aside worth it? Now, it's up to you. If you think it is and you can defend it, then go ahead here. I personally would have not thought that worth the risk. I wouldn't have regarded it as self-censorship, simply because it would have been something which, while not was legal, it was basically too open to misinterpretation, too open. And in a way, you need to protect the author from what they might not regard, what a reasonable person would not regard as anti-Semitism, but a bad faith actor would. So that is the extra tests. I wouldn't call it self-censorship, I would just call it being realistic about certain verbal formulations and the explosions are likely to cause.
Thank you, this far, Fraser.